Hello everyone and welcome to this episode, the Identity One of the Women Talking About Learning podcast. I'm Andrew Jacobs. In today's fast-paced world, many of us find ourselves trapped in specific identities that no longer serve us. This phenomenon, known as identity lock-in, can lead to feelings of stagnation and dissatisfaction. We have four wonderful guests to share their insights on this topic, exploring how we can break free from these constraints and redefine ourselves. Our first guest is Susan Fitzell. An international speaker and author, Susan brings decades of expertise in fostering human potential to educational and business communities worldwide. Having been diagnosed with neurodivergence concurrently with her child, Susan offers deep personal insights into dyslexia, ADHD, autism and auditory processing disorder. Our second guest is Dr. Meghan Waldron. A lifelong dreamer, Meghan inspires students to share their stories, building confidence through hands-on writing, reflection and honest feedback. More recently, she's encouraging female leaders to do the same through her work with Women in Change USA. Our next guest is Niki Hobson. Niki is a learning specialist at the BBC and is an experienced learning designer who's worked across the private, public and voluntary sectors. She's also a smartphone videographer and trainer who helps others create great video with their smartphones. Our final guest is Aiko Sato. Aiko works with people and organisations to understand how learning, culture and behaviour evolve together over time. She often acts as a bridge between ideas and practice, helping insights travel from learning spaces into real situations. Recorded in January of 2026, this is Women Talking About Learning. This is Susan, Meghan, Niki and Aiko talking about identity.
Hello, everyone. It's so exciting to see all of you. You know, I was doing research on this topic, the identity one. Like, I know how I felt when I decided to say, yeah, that's a good one for me, this topic, but I wasn't sure if my perspective was common or something other people think about. And I learned something I'd never heard before. Do you know that there is a word for being stuck in an identity, and it's called identity lock-in? Niki, have you ever heard of that? Identity lock-in.
No, I've not, but I'm very, very intrigued. I would assume that it is when you stick, but yeah, I can't wait to hear more about that.
Okay. Anybody else? Meg, have you ever heard of it? Aiko?
I've never heard of it, but I think it's a common thing that a lot of people experience, especially mid-career. You've been somewhere for a long time, you're comfortable in that spot, and my students would say, they're locked in, right? But I think we can also find ourselves somewhat stuck, and we forget where we start and our identity begins, and vice versa. So I could definitely see how that happens.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah. Did somebody else have something?
No, it's really interesting that that's kind of the commonality, because when you said that just now, Susan, I was like, what? That sounds ridiculous, because I often find myself, and the reason why I was curious about this topic is I'm always trying to figure out what is my identity, and I'm always talking about how identities are so fluid and intersectional. We're a part of so many different types of selves at once. So the idea of an identity lock-in for me sounds really scary, but what was kind of the conversation around it? I'm curious.
Same, exactly what you're all saying is you get locked into an identity, and women are more often challenged to get out of it than men and other genders. It's just being locked into an identity. We're kind of conditioned as women to, play nice, be loyal, stay with something. And even if it's no longer serving us or causing us to lose, ourselves. And we feel like if we do change our identity, we might be losing that version of ourselves, which is really difficult for people, especially women, who we build this identity around who we are.
Susan, I'm intrigued on what the research said. So is that we get locked in an identity at work or at home or in our social lives? Do we change our identities and they become locked in that situation, or is it a general whole identity?
In what I was looking at, it happens at various periods of your life, and it can happen in different roles. And that, for me, I'll just say my little bit for me. I studied Kung Fu for 30 years. I probably should have stopped studying Kung Fu 10 to 15 years earlier. But Kung Fu was such a part of my identity and I remember saying, I can't separate from this. It's so much enough. My license plate on my car says Kung Fu. It still says Kung Fu. But when it was no longer serving me, when because of age and other limitations, I could no longer grow in Kung Fu. I couldn't advance. I couldn't do what I wanted to do anymore. Like as far as what my own goals were in the art, I had such a hard time leaving. And it took a crisis, a kind of a very toxic event to finally say, okay, I'm done with this. And I'll go to what I love, which was ballroom dance. That's one part of my life. And the reason I chose this podcast because I'm in another part of that, but I don't want to monetize the conversation. So or monopolize, that's the word. I wonder what you think, Meg, because you had a lot to say about it. You seem to know about it.
Well, I was a high school teacher by trade and moved into higher ed a few years ago. And so I'm wondering if this is a learned behavior, especially now in the university world. I work with students every day that just struggle. They vacillate. I'm pre-med. I have to be pre-med. Ever since I was 4, I knew I wanted to be a doctor. And their heart might be leaning towards a completely different career. So sometimes I wonder, is this something where this is a learned behavior where you feel like you have to lock in because you have those external pressures and in addition maybe to how you also identify yourself. So I don't know. Thoughts, Aiko? You think it's a learned behavior or is it the pressure we put on ourselves?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I used to work with elementary school kids. And I mean, I'm inclined to say it's a learned behavior because even as, at kindergarten, first grade, you kind of ask them, like, what's your favorite color? What do you want to be when you grow up? Who do you we try to get these like characteristics placed on. And I know it's so that we can learn different facts about them. But I think, that plus this idea that we have to be like really, really excellent at something in order for it to count or be worthwhile. So I think we start to develop this sunk cost fallacy of, well, I've already spent so much time on this. And if I'm going to do something here or do something there, then I can't spend as much. If it's not going to be 100%, is it worth doing? Like, is it okay to do something poorly or be something, half-heartedly? And I think we get kind of scared of that. But I do think that is a social model because when you look at younger kids or when you look at people also past retirement age, sometimes the freedom of kind of stepping outside the societal confines allows people to be more playful. So I don't know. What do you think, Niki?
I think you're right. I think it starts with that learnt behavior. I think there's a lot of things that we develop as a child, like I want to do this, and then it feeds through to university as in, oh, I've committed to a 3-year degree. I've got to keep with this. And then I think it becomes that social pressure and I'd say external pressure, obligation maybe, that you kind of have to stick at it. Especially like if we use the example of a degree, you've probably been funded and supported by your family or your friends. If you then at the end of that degree turn around and go, oh no, I don't want to be a doctor, for example, do you then feel like you're going to let people down? So that's probably where the lock-in comes in because there's that pressure. So I think it's probably a bit of both. And it's then, do you have, I say the courage, I think that's probably the right word, the courage to break that. And again, if we stick to that university example, when you're 21, 22, telling your parents, no, I don't want to do this, that's a really brave thing to do.
I think there's also a way to change the narrative a little bit because I heard you say, Niki, that, you have to come to this breaking point, right? Or Susan, you said that it was something kind of catastrophic that made you pivot. But I also heard you say, Susan, that you had those transferable skills. While I wouldn't want to meet you in a back alley with 30 years of Kung Fu, right?
No.
You said that you're able to kind of pivot that to be a salsa dancer. And so I think what I always like to talk with students and in particularly also with women is that a lot of the skills we have are transferable. So our identity is fundamental, but those skills and, traits can transfer into other professions, other areas.
Yeah, I think that's true. And for me, in ballroom, I found that, I'm doing dance sport. I had to stay competing because I needed goals and I wanted to have all that, the benefits of partner dancing, et cetera. So anyway, for me, it was looking at my life. I'm like, how many years do I have left? See, I am that person at retirement age. And that's my new identity challenge. Who are you after work? And I think for most of us, that's a big part of it. Work, what we do with our relationship, like we have a significant relationship for most of our years. And then the other one is maybe our hobbies. How do we have invested so much in a hobby or in a lifetime activity, and how do we move past that? And some of them are inevitable, like having children and they grow up and they leave the nest. You can't stop that identity change from mother to now empty nester. But some you have a choice for, and that's where we get locked in, even when it no longer serves us, like the college kid. That's really good and really good example. No longer serves me to be in this profession, but I feel like I have to because, and there could be a myriad of reasons.
Yeah. I work with a lot of coaches, life coaches, career coaches. And so one of the core tenets around that is this broadening of definitions. And so it's really always, and I think that's kind of why I got so caught on like the idea that identity is so fluid, because in one mind, like going from kung fu to ballroom, for example, feels like two transitions. You could have put an umbrella on, say, like, I'm somebody who loves to use my body and I love to be physical and I love, and like that didn't change, and so, or I'm someone who loves to be curious. And so there are different ways to compartmentalize things. But I also think that there's also some core aspects that perhaps don't change. And I wonder, yeah, how that does that fit into this conversation? I don't know. How does that land?
Oh, I think it's very valid because when you said it's put it under the umbrella, I just had a light bulb go off and like, oh, right. That's really not like totally changing. You reframe it. What do Meg and Nikki think about that? I think it's brilliant.
As you were talking,
Yeah, I think. Oh, go
sorry,
ahead, Nikki.
Meg. It reminded
Sorry,
me.
I called on two of you.
Yeah. It reminded me of, you mentioned earlier about like Kung Fu not serving you anymore. Well, I'm going to mention that dreaded C word of like COVID. So before COVID, I ran a lot, but I then stopped and I couldn't figure out why. And like you were saying earlier, I felt like I'd lost part of myself and part of my identity because I met a lot of people through running. It became a really sociable thing. During COVID, that stopped. I started running again after COVID. I stupidly signed up for a marathon, then had to keep going out. I didn't do it. I stopped. But I kept thinking, why don't I enjoy this anymore? Where is this gone? And taking that step back and, like you say, looking at that umbrella, I realized it wasn't the running necessarily that kept me going back every week. It was the people and it was the social element. So I think taking a step back and reflecting on why was this such a big part of my identity? Well, it was that connection with other people. That was what it was that drew me to that hobby. Not necessarily the moving of my body or the fitness. I mean, that's an added bonus, but it was I see the same people every week. We have a coffee, we have a catch up. That was the thing that I was missing. And obviously during lockdown, we all missed that. So yeah, I think looking for that umbrella is a really interesting way of looking at identity.
Do you think this is something that fundamentally just impacts women, or do you think that men experience these shifts in identity, these identity crises? Thoughts on that?
I'm sure they do. It's whether they talk about it as openly as we do.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Well, I think they do. I know my husband has, when he had to change his careers, but it's a little bit different. I think it's a little, in my opinion, it's harder for women because we're taught to be loyal and nice and grateful and not rock the boat. And a lot of times when we want to change our identity, we may not be able to be loyal anymore. It may not feel nice to the people looking on our social network. Because you're right, that's a big part of what I do because I'm an extrovert. I want to be around people. And Kung Fu is a lot about people. And right now my work is a lot about who, if I change what I do for a living, who am I and who are my friends and who do I socialize with and how do I do blah, blah, blah that I do now. So, but I think that we're taught that leaving means that we failed or we quit or we're ungrateful for the people who did XYZ to get us where we are, or we're selfish, so we stay. And I'm not sure men have all those same pressures.
I think it can also depend on the industry you're in. So I worked with pre-nursing students for a long time. They did a lot of informational interviews with nursing staff. I was a high school teacher for almost 15 years. And I know leaving professions that are more vocational like that, there's just a tremendous amount of guilt, I think, when you shed that identity, even if you're moving into a very similar field. So I think it comes it's not only dependent on gender, but also what your area you're in.
Could be. I mean, it's funny that three of us, Nikki, have you ever worked with students?
Not higher ed or education. No, I work with adults.
Okay. But three of us are teachers in K-12, which is really kind of interesting that three of us are in this room and we all have similar backgrounds.
I have kind of a hot take, and I'm curious to see what your guys' reaction to it around identity and gender. Sometimes I think, and this is a personal reflection, I use the comfort of labeling my identities as almost like validation for why I choose to do something or how I approach something. Sometimes I think that for men, given the space of privilege that they're in, just being a man is enough in a space. I'm at the gym, men work out. I'm at this certain role and at this company, men are bosses, the man of the house, that kind of thing. And so I feel like sometimes when I give a justification by saying, well, this is my tendency, this is important to me, it's almost like I have to validate why I'm taking up space or why I'm saying something in a certain way. Not to say that that's all that identities serve, but I do find that is a comfort that I have.
Yeah. And I think sometimes to that point, Aiko, we have to explain our identity or why we deserve space at that table where it might come naturally to other people for sure. I'm going to switch gears. I'm curious, Niki, because you work with adult learners. How do you think learning plays into our identity, and why is it important for us to be continuous learners as women?
Oh, what a question.
I know,
That's a
right?
great question.
Hard hitting on a Friday afternoon. It's only 10 a.m. here in the States. So
Very good.
I'm on my first cup of coffee.
What a
I'll
question.
recap. Why should women keep learning?
I would reframe that to why should everybody keep learning?
That's fair.
But we are on a podcast around
women.
So, but I think it's coming back to that. We all hit different stages of life. Like you say, Susan, if you have children, that does then impact, well, it consumes your entire life. So at that point, you start learning about different things.
I feel like learning for me is critical for our minds and our brains and our souls. If we're not learning, we're stagnating. And as women, that can seriously have a negative impact on our identity because, our identity from our early years is often told it's defined by what's around us and what we do and who we are and how we relate to other people, how we're caring and helpful and womanly we are. So if we're not still learning about other things that help us feel like, hey, I'm capable, I'm empowered, I can learn, I can do different things, then we really have to ask, who are we?
I think to expand on that, Susan, I think if we don't continue to learn, it's very easy to get boxed in, to get locked in. You take a certain role at certain points of your life. And as I said earlier, it can become consuming. So if you're not continuously learning, continuously reading about things, trying new things, then when you do get the example we used earlier with the empty nest, that can feel really lonely. So I think that continuous learning is oh God, when are the kids going? I can't wait for the kids to go because I want to do this and I can't do it yet and things like that. It just keeps us going at different phases of our lives.
That's interesting because one of the reasons I stayed with Kung Fu was because I was working in parenting and I knew that I've always loved dance, but I knew that if I went to dance and I've tried, I couldn't make half the lessons because I had kids to manage or I had to go to work so I thought, well, at least Kung Fu is something I've been doing so long. I can miss, a week or two or a lesson or here or there and still do it. To go to something totally new, no matter what it is, for me, it was dance. Now you have to invest a whole different set of time. And I stayed where I was because life circumstances of being a mom and an employee, or in my case, self-employed, kind of kept me there. Yeah, I made choices to stay there.
I think there's another point that we could add to that of when you are so consumed with a certain period of your life, learning and being curious about something can be an escape because learning something new is challenging. It puts you in a completely different mind frame from the normal day-to-day, from the having to explain why you need that seat at that table. You put yourself into a different environment. Well, you don't need to explain why you're here, and everybody around you is supportive because they want you to learn this new skill or this new thing that you're trying to do. So it's taking you out of the environment that you might feel stuck in to a completely new, supportive, again, going back to that community that you can then continue to grow. And you never know where that's going to take you.
That's a good point. That exactly describes when I got my master's degree and my children were 10 and 13. That's exactly what happened. Aiko, what do you think?
As I'm listening to you guys, I'm really fascinated by it. But one thing I'm kind of struck by is like, when you talk about learning, you talked about like maybe going for another degree or a new skill. Could there be some sort of like passive learn, like just like being aware, because I'm thinking about people who are over capacity or maybe perhaps hitting a burnout stage in their career or something. I feel like taking on more and learning more perhaps might feel like a lot. And so is there a way to learn in a way that is passive, or do you think it always has to be this active effort to try and partake in a new skill or a new thought?
Yeah, I think going back to Niki's example from COVID and having the running group, I think learning can also happen when we shed things. At least that has been my experience, right? When we make room and we kind of take a little bit off of our plate. And sometimes that passive learning, I think, can help us a lot. And I have found that through just connecting with other women. I decided to walk the Camino. I have MS. And so I decided I was going to walk the Camino. It's 100 miles. And once my MS was under control, I was going with a friend of mine. But I was not in shape. And the woman I was going with was 70. And I was like, all right, she can't show me up. So I started a walking group just with some women in my neighborhood. And to your point, Niki, we go every morning at 5:30 in the morning. And I would never have done that. We had our year anniversary yesterday, and it's cold here. It's 21 degrees. But I have learned so much more from that group of women. There's a grandmother, there's a new mom, the advice they give back and forth. It reminds me of that idea of like it takes a village. So yes, I have gone through formal schooling and all that, but I think a lot of the passive learning just through conversation, camaraderie, commiserating, right? All those are forms of learning. It doesn't have to come with a degree, at least in my experience. I learn more outside of the classroom, I think.
And sometimes inserting ourselves into other groups of people, whether they're social groups or whether they're groups that might support our careers or other, like I had to learn a whole new dance community and group. It can be scary. That can be uncomfortable for us in itself. And getting past that fear is a learning experience. And then what we learn is even better from that.
I think, like you say, you learn a lot when you're doing that as well. You learn a lot about yourself when you put yourself into new environments as well.
Do you think community informs identity? And if it does, how do you think it does that? I'm tossing it over to one of Andrew's questions.
I would love to take this question on really quick.
Yeah.
I for those on audio only. So I think so I'm Asian American, I'm Japanese American, and I grew up in a primarily white American neighborhood when I was younger. I was the only Japanese person there. And it's very interesting because my parents, I'm first generation, so my parents are here from Japan, and I'm the first one born in the States. And so they have a really, really heavy Japanese community that supported them. And then after that, I grew up and kind of like learned how to be a kid in a very, very separate, like white American westernized community. And for the longest time, my primary struggle was when I'm in this community, I behave like this. And when I'm in this community, I behave like that. Because who you're supposed to be as a young girl, as a woman, as a student, the expectations are so different. And the one thing that was like core to me was that I tend to be very like people pleasing. So I want to be the best version of a outspoken, interesting, individualistic person when I'm at school because my teachers are like, well done, I hear you a lot. But then when I go back to my Japanese community, I was like, I'm doing fine. I don't need anything. Thank you. What can I do for you? Because I want to be a good Japanese girl, So once I was kind of out of these institutions and I was supposed to figure out who I was, am I neither of those? Am I both of those? What do you do when those two expectations compete? I think that really was my turning point to actually answer that question, for me at least, to say, wow, who you're around, the conversations that you hear, the ways that people are attracted to you, your energy, your conversation, that really informs that either highlights or delights kind of what's kind of in the middle or inside of you. I do a lot of physical, which is not good for an audio format. So for me, that was a really, really big yes moment for I'm very, very impacted by who I'm around. Who am I when I'm by myself?
I think that's a great example.
Yes.
So I'm going to share a quite personal story. So my auntie adopted two girls from Sri Lanka. And my cousin has this week been in Sri Lanka to find her biological family because she wasn't too sure what her identity was. So she was adopted when I think she was 3, came across to France because my auntie lives in France. Obviously, my auntie is English, so has grown up in a French environment with an English mother, so had that hybrid mix of both countries, but then is Sri Lankan and has really struggled with her identity. Like, what is she meant to be in this Western world? And yeah, as I say, is literally flying back as we speak, having just met her biological mother, father, and found out she's got a brother and sister. So it's going to be really interesting to see what that discovery does to her and where she sees her place in this world, because that's a lot to discover and a lot to then fit into a white French-British family. So I think it has a massive impact, like the community, the people that you're around massively shape who you are. And then it's whether you choose to embrace. So for example, in my cousin, if she chooses to embrace her Sri Lankan family, what's that going to bring to her life? Now, secretly, I'm hoping for the recipes. I want the food. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot more to it, but I'm looking forward to the food.
Oh, I mean, yeah, that's beautiful, Nikki. Thank you for sharing. Also, I want to offer if she ever needs anyone to talk to, if who's gone through a similar. But I think what's interesting about what you said is like who she's going to be. And it's this idea about like we're supposed to settle into something or we're hoping to find something to be like, oh yes, like this is the mold I want to fit into. And it's kind of scary, but true to remember the fact that we're organic beings and that we don't ever stop changing or moving or being a part of something. 'Cause I wasn't a part of this community until today. And now you guys have changed my path and you guys have changed my organic being. And tomorrow, maybe I'll meet someone new and we shed our skin cells and we change our brains, spaces. And so we're always like moving and ebbing and flowing. And I think that can be scary because the who am I question will never be answered. But also kind of comforting to know that, am I chasing a goal that I don't need to be chasing? And could I just settle into the fact that I'm ever changing, because my identity as being Japanese American is so different being Japanese American in America and being Japanese American in England, where I don't think anyone cares about the fact that I'm Japanese, but they're really fascinated about what's going on in the States, so, and I'm like, gosh, I don't know if I can speak to that.
There's actually a name for what Nikki and Aiko both described, and we studied this. It's called third culture kids. So it's students who are like twice removed from their original culture. So it's really fascinating. And I think it helps us think about, are we intrinsically who we are, as Aiko said, ever, always changing, or are we more shaped by those communities that we're in? So I guess it can be an and both, right?
Now I'm interested. Do you want it to ever finish or do you want to continuously change? Like we said earlier, it's kind of scary. Which is scarier, being stuck or continuously changing?
For me, it's definitely being stuck. I love learning. I'm a huge proponent of continuous learning. I feel like we can model that for our children, for, people who we might mentor. So I think when we stop learning, that's when it gets a little bit scary. And I think that's where you can definitely find yourself stuck.
I'm with Meg on that one. I think it would be more difficult and scarier to be stuck, and especially since a lot of times when we're stuck, we become more and more unhappy. Being stuck doesn't encourage happiness. It doesn't foster happiness typically. If we're saying the word stuck, that's not a positive word. And so
No, I realize that.
yeah, but that's a good word, because we're not stuck if we're happy and in a place we want to be. We're stuck when we're in a place we don't want to be and we're stuck there. So I think that's scarier to me. But again, I think it has a lot to do with the people that are around us and our relationships and well, if I change this, then I will lose that person. I'll never see them again. Good friends at work, family members, etc. It just keeps going. You just reminded me of something I never thought about. I'm also a first generation American on my dad's side, and my dad was French Canadian. And even though my mom came from French Canadian, she'd been born in the United States and was raised in the United States. And I think the difference between the two of them was like night and day. Yeah, personality, but even just their whole value of their life experience and their value for learning and education. And it was my father who instilled in me from a very young age, learn, learn, learn. Because, and even as a woman, he's like, people can take anything away from you, but they can't take away what's in your mind. They can't take
It's
away
very
what you've
true.
learned. And I'll never
Mm.
forget him. He's told me that when I was a little girl. So I don't know if that was just typical to his experience in the world, but I mean, he was a self-taught man.
I'm reflecting kind of on what you were just saying about, how stuck is not a bad word. And I had this visual in my head about like things are only, something is like, there's two wedges, right? And if you're trying to remove it and it can't, and you want to remove it, then it's stuck. But if you are trying to remove it and you don't want to remove it, then it's secure. And it's the same, joint. And so I think like, as we think a little bit about identities and how we define it, because I know that there's some identities that I don't want to move. I'm proud of the fact that I'm a daughter. I'm proud of the fact that I'm a sister. Those are identities I think are really secure for me, that I don't want to ever change and won't ever. And then there's some that I think I find a lot of comfort in the fact that it's abstract and nuanced. So I think like, a lot of my takeaway from this conversation from you incredible ladies is finding those pieces that, to your point, serve you and that you feel proud of and that you feel like elevate who you want to be, and then other elements of your identity that are perhaps transient and temporary and might be part of something.
I love that take on it. I think that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Yes, that's going to make me go away and reflect on what am I happy? What parts of my identity am I happy with? So I love how you framed that. Thank you.
I agree. So what would we suggest for people who want to understand their own identities better and what they can shed and then what they want to hold on to?
I think most of the pain around changing identities or moving into something new is the fact that we feel like we're losing a version of ourselves. And if we can think about the umbrella concept that Aiko talked about, or the fact that can be continuous learners that Meg talked about, and we're constantly evolving and changing, it softens that fear, because the version of ourself is ideally who we want to be, and what's in our heart and soul, and how we want to move on in the world. And it's not necessarily what somebody else has defined for us. And if we can hone in on that and be flexible, and fluid came up a lot early in this conversation, I think it's a little easier to make that shift outside of the version. Instead of saying we're losing a version of ourselves, we're gaining a new version of ourselves to add to the version, we're moving beyond.
I like that. I wonder if it's like, to extend on that slightly, taking that step back from identity and looking more at your values. So Aiko, you mentioned about you love the fact that you're a daughter, you love the fact that you're a sister. So is that your family values coming through, and that's what makes you part of your identity? For me, one of my values is continuous learning. So that's where part of my identity is doing my master's currently, continuing to do this, exploring that. So I think maybe taking that step back to what are your values, and then how you show that to the world, how you put that across in your identity.
That's a really, really good point. That's powerful, because I almost feel like you just hit the core of it. That's who we are. It's our values. It's how we define ourselves and what we stand for, and that shapes what we choose. And if we're in alignment with our values, then maybe that shift to a different identity is okay.
You're under the same umbrella.
Yes.
Well, you asked the question, Meg. I'm curious about what your final takeaway is.
Which question was that I go about? Which ones we want?
What's our final takeaway? What would you? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm with Niki. I think as long as you are locked in a good way to what you really care about and who intrinsically you feel you are, I think that what you do and what shifts you make and what you learn next is kind of irrelevant. I think we all discovered our identities are kind of fluid, changing. It depends on what circles we're in and what we're talking about when it comes to identity. But I think it's being open to the fact that it's going to change. But it also might stay the same, and that's okay too.
Well, it's been amazing talking to you all. So thank you very much. You as well.
Yeah, thank you. This was exciting.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a great conversation.
What a great episode. As our guest mentioned, understanding the fluidity of identity can empower us to redefine ourselves in ways that align with our current values and aspirations. A massive thank you to Susan, Meghan, Niki and Aiko for their insight into this topic and for their time in making this a brilliant recording. I know you want to connect with them afterwards, and their details are in the show notes, along with information about how to connect with us here at Women Talking About Learning. Remember to like and subscribe to the podcast on your podcast player. It does make a real difference in helping people find and recommend us. We are looking for guests to be on this wonderful podcast, and if you're interested, then please do get in touch via hello@larn.com. We're back in a couple of weeks, and next time it's the Return to Work one. As always, thank you for listening, and we'll see you again soon.